it's an absolute thrill to do this. The last time I did this, I did it in person at the Portsmouth Sailing Club, which just across the water from you, as you know, and I enjoyed it very much. You can do quite a lot in person that you can't do this way, so I'm feeling a bit like Richard Baker. Actually, don't I mean Richard? Anyway, I'm feeling a bit like a newscaster here, but I'm hoping that everybody can hear me all right. If at any point you want to ask a question, there is, I think there's a hand raising thing that you can use, which will allow you to, I can see what you're asking. On balance, we probably don't want to have too many. Well done, I saw Maureen's just found it. On balance, we probably just want to carry on. And it's the curious thing for me, of course, is to be talking to people that I can't hear and to see people who aren't smiling at me. So some of you are smiling, but there's no video. Some of you are just here. Just welcome Dolores, my cousin's wife from down south, and we're going to start. Now, ideally, I'll make myself the focus. How can I do that? That'll be okay. That's fine. Right. So Alfred West was my great-grandfather. He was born in Gosport. He died in Southsea, and he's buried at Kingston Cemetery in Southsea, and you'll know more about all that. My colleague Dolores, who's just joined, spent quite a happy time restoring his grave. So you'll actually see Dolores Clover's work a bit later on. Now, the talk will take the form of a PowerPoint presentation. Everything's PowerPoint these days, of course. And so the first thing I'm going to do is to put my slideshow onto the screen and share it. And hopefully we should be underway. If anybody can see the screen, my sister, anybody, can you confirm that you can actually see the big screen?
Yes, no problem. It's looking good.
There. So the talk starts here then. So Alfred John West, photographer and cinematographer, 1881, 1913 aren't his dates. Those are the dates when he was actually active. And you're going to see in a moment. And there is my great-grandfather. Note the very elegant knotted string tie. It could come back into fashion. And I think the collar is actually a fixed collar. They used to have collars they could stick on with studs. I've even got some studs somewhere. But there he is. It's a photograph. He was a studio photograph. And of course, being photographers, studio photographs were very much their thing. So I've said he was the creator of our Navy, and you'll find out more about that later on. And I'm trying to put in this talk some of the things that led up to his work. You will never have heard of him. Well, some people might have heard of him, but mostly haven't. And part of the reason for that is that there really isn't very much left of his moving pictures. There's an enormous amount, actually, of the still pictures, which again we'll talk about. And he deserves to be better known, and perhaps through a talk like this we can improve that. Now, in 1881, these were all the people at 97 High Street, Gosport. George was the father, and George had in fact been a carpenter. And one of the reasons it's believed that he got into photography was that carpenters were used to making small and elegant boxes, and those are the basis of the camera. So it wasn't surprising that a carpenter became a photographer. And his occupation in the census is photographer. And George West, the son of George West, interesting again, the same name, he's a photographer. And Mary West is the daughter, and she was born in London, and her occupation is a photographer. William West, the son, birthplace, Gosport, occupation, photographer. Maria West, who set up her own business eventually in Guildford, birthplace, Gosport, occupation, photographer. Alfred West, who's my great-grandfather, he was 22 at that point, occupation, photographer. And Mary West, who probably wasn't quite old enough to do photographs yet. Perhaps she was in some of them anyway. And then there was also a general servant who worked in the house who'd come from Oxford. So that's the household in 1881, which is really when the photography business starts. So these are my great-grandfather's brothers. There's Alfred there. They're actually written over the top. There's Fred is here. There's William, and there's George. And there they are all standing, having their photographs taken in the Gosport studio, Eagle House, 97 High Street, looking not at the camera. They were probably told not to look at the camera because it makes it more interesting. And then the photograph was taken again after they'd put their hats on, which I think is quite amusing, really. I wear a hat myself, not particularly in deference to Alfred, but I think it's quite nice to wear a hat. This photograph, I think, came to me from my cousin who's in Vancouver, Eric, name of West. So here they are. They're their dates of birth, and you can see that it's quite a widely spread family. And that's the rest. So we're talking here about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're talking about 9 children in the family, which is really one of those big Victorian families. Now in Gosport, there was the photo studio, which was named Eagle House. I don't think it's called that anymore. And it was at 97 High Street. And some years ago, I went over to Gosport, crossed over on the ferry, and took that photograph of the building that I believe to be Eagle House. And I think somebody told me it probably wasn't a shoe shop anymore. But that, if you go down Gosport High Street towards the bottom, you will actually see the site where the photography studio was. But of course, he had great ambitions, and so the photography business wasn't just in Gosport. It expanded out immediately to Southsea, and that was in Villiers Road, where he built a studio in a house that still exists. It's called the Anchorage, and he fitted it all out with film equipment and all the rest of it. And that was his business address really for the entire 16 years roughly of his business. And in fact, if you go down Villiers Road now in Southsea, you will see a house called the Anchorage, and that is exactly the location. And as a rather interesting aside, after my mother and father were married, they didn't have anywhere to live, so they actually lived in the Anchorage for a year or two, which was quite an interesting thing. And there it is. And this was the Portsmouth side studio, all devoted pretty much to film. The photography side was at Gosport and in Palmerston Road. So these are the locations then. Roselle was the house, Palmerston Road was the shop in Portsmouth, and 97 High Street was in Gosport. And this is just a little diagram in case you ever want to go and have a look at them. Those are the places where they're located, very close together. In those days, photographers made an enormous business out of taking photographs of families, and military photographs of people who served and that kind of thing. And this is a typical example of the kind of photograph that would have been taken in Gosport. This one's marked Southsea, but in fact, when you look at the back of it, you see that both the locations are mentioned. We don't know anything about this group, but they are delightful, and they're dressed up as sailors. And whereas today photographs can be done in a moment, anybody can do a photograph. In those days, it was a real thing to collect and to send to your friends. And they were sometimes called carte de visite. That's the back of that one. And you can see at the bottom there, this is quite interesting, there's an index number. And a friend of mine, George Malcolmson, who works at the Submarine Museum, he has an archive of postcards and so forth. And he said, well, if you can find the date of something and you can find these numbers, you could actually start to create a log of when something was taken. So if we knew that 591 had been taken in 1883, we'd have known this one was from that date. Unfortunately, there really aren't enough of these to look at to give us that kind of stratigraphy on there. You'll also see it says 40 medals awarded for excellence. This was an award-winning company. Here's another photograph taken in the same way, and you see at the bottom, G. West and Son, Southsea and Gosport. You're not seeing Alfred's name yet because it was G. West and Son in the early days. And there's another one, Southsea and Gosport. That's actually Prince George, and that is in fact an interesting picture because it shows that the West family was already quite well connected with royalty and people of that sort who moved about in Portsmouth and Gosport as yachtists. And here's the back of that picture. Again, there's the copy of the number. And you see it says Eagle House, Gosport. 2 seconds. I don't know what the weather's like down there, but it's quite warm here. I was doing some research earlier on to find out early photographs, and there was a huge market for photographs of this type in publications. This picture appeared in Harper's Magazine, which is a magazine published in New York. And although it's obviously an etching. It's actually an engraving. It's an engraving from the G. West photograph. And I know this because I found a reference to it in the Illustrated London News. And then I was able to look up Harper's Magazine and just extract this picture. So if you can imagine that as a photograph rather than an etching, those are the kind of early photographs that were being made in Gosport by the West Company. And very much, I think they're probably behind in the background, that probably is the Gosport shore, although I wouldn't swear to it because it's changed a lot since then. That's the ship is called the Sultan, and it's got a split personality. As you can see, it's got 3 funnels, it's got a propeller at the back, but in case all that goes wrong, it's all fully rigged with 3 masts and could sail around Cape Horn without any engines at all. That tradition of having ships as sailors and as engine ships really came to an end about 10 years after this picture was taken. And there we are, so re-engraved. And that's an 1886 engraving of an early West photograph. Well, West wrote an autobiography, and if you can still see me, which you may be able to, this is the autobiography I'm just holding now. He called it Sea Salts and Celluloid. He wrote it in 1936, and my father helped him to type it out. I think he helped him to write it, actually. And he gives us a tantalizing glimpse of what it was like in the early days. It is tantalizing because there's about 25 things you really would like to know that he never wrote down. But he said it was the first week in August, 1882, dotted about the Solent, white wings were heeling over. This is his poetic description. And these are some of the photographs that he made at that time of yachts sailing in the Solent. Many of those yachts, of course, built at Camper and Nicholson's and places in Gosport. So these are some of the photographs which are in his catalogue, which he published in 1913, of all the pieces of film and photographs that he'd taken. Now, in 1881, and this is really to do with the development of photographs, an invention was made in America by Eastman Company called the dry plate. Up until the dry plate, to take a photograph, you would have had to have made a plate of glass wet. You'd have had to have put some silver salts onto it and moved it about in a dark tank. Then you'd have had to put that into a camera all wet. Then you'd have exposed it, and then you would have taken it out and you'd develop it quite quickly. And the invention of the dry plate meant that you could actually take your photograph and put it in a cupboard and have it developed later. And they're all pre-sensitized. So you didn't have to worry about the collodion and the wet plate. And you could also make exposures extremely quickly. With the wet plate, it would take quite a long time to make an exposure, but the dry plate, everything became very fast, and you'll see one of the results of that in a minute. I managed to find a picture of what a pack of dry plates would look like, 3.5 by 3.5, and that's probably roughly the size that they would have used in the 1880s, 90s at the Gosport shop. And this is an advertisement from that period showing how the wet plate system was superseded by the dry plate system. The wet plate system, they've got this enormous amount of kit they're carrying about. The chap who's taken the photograph looks utterly miserable. He's carrying his camera. But the people who are doing the dry plate stuff are standing up straight. They're looking ahead. They're having a conversation. Their trousers are even properly pressed. So you can see that the minute the dry plate came in, everything changed in photography. Now, in 1881, Alfred said that he'd been a photographer before dry plates, but he wanted to photograph yachts that were under full sail. And his first pictures he took off Southsea Beach, and he took 6 pictures. And he wanted to take pictures of much bigger ships. So what he did was he bought a boat, he equipped it, and you'll see how he equipped it in a minute, had a sailing master to help him sail it, and he maneuvered his boat into favourable positions to look at the boats. This is an advertisement at the Palmerston roadside for the yachting studies, showing the kind of things that they did. They were very proud to take pictures of the America's Cup yachts and ships of war, sailors ashore and afloat, torpedo warfare. You'll see that in a minute. And a lot of articles were written. This one was probably in the Magic Lantern magazine, saying that the G. West have a reputation for their fine photographs. Now, this is one of his early photographs. I don't know the name of this yacht, but as you can see, it's probably off, that's probably Gill Kicker Point in the distance. That's probably off Southsea Beach. And if you notice, the rendering is very precise. You can see the waves across the bow. You can see how the rigging is held down, and this would have been taken on a dry plate with an instantaneous photograph. He went about all over the place taking photographs, and he took a picture of HMS Bacchante, and the captain of the Royal Yacht saw it, and he showed it to King Edward VIII, or King Edward VII. He was a Prince of Wales then, and he was so pleased, he said, "Bring me the photographer, bring me West." And that's probably the Bacchante. It's probably taken by Alfred West. Again, we don't know that, but it's probably very likely. Now, the yacht, the small yacht that he sailed about to take the pictures in, it was a yawl, and he put his camera in a special iron frame, and it was clamped down with a big weight hanging underneath it, a bit on the Steadicam principle that's used now in film, and he could turn that around. So there's a picture drawn by Alfred West of his yawl. The mizzenmast is shorter than the mainmast, as you see, and in the middle is this little box arrangement, and it says camera as seen from outside, and that's actually in his book, and he drew it as an illustration for the book. And this is the arrangement he had on here. He put the camera, this is suspended from a frame, and underneath is a big heavy weight suspended on these strings, and as a result, as the boat moves about, the camera, largely speaking, stays in one plane, and that's the idea behind that. And this is all his instructions of how it worked. Also, though, in those days, it was early days, and you could invent your own things. You had to, if you had an instantaneous picture, you obviously had to have an instantaneous shutter. So he devised this little shutter arrangement, which used an elastic band to move it from position A to position F, and it was closed at this point. In the middle, it exposed very quickly, and then it was shut again. So that's how he devised his own camera shutter, which he fixed to the camera. Now, an early photograph he put into a competition. This was a picture of a yacht by Lord David, owned by Lord Cecil. It was called the Chittiwee. And when he put it into the exhibition, they said, well, we can't accept it because you've actually retouched it in the, not in the darkroom. So in fact, they looked at the negative and they said, no, actually, this is a completely genuine picture. As well as being it's not a high resolution snap. Sorry about that, but it could have been. But if you notice, the sense of composition is wonderful in this picture. You're looking at this from the after leeward side. The Lord Cecil is looking at you. It fills the frame beautifully. He didn't have a viewfinder of the kind we had now. He had, I think, probably a metal coat hanger, which was stuck up above the camera. And when he sort of worked out that it was roughly in the coat hanger, he would press the shutter and away he would go. But it's a very artistic picture as well as being a very finely composed one. As a result of all the work that G. West and Son, particularly Alfred West, did in the 1880s and 90s, he won about 40 medals through international and national photographic competitions. And my cousin Simon West, who's in Australia, Victoria, has the collection himself there. The reason why this is a bit fuzzy is this is a still from one of his advertisements, that flyers that he would have handed out at various events. And if I do this, 43 medals, there we are. And you can see some of the medals that Simon's sent me some photographs of, some of these photographic medals. They are quite beautiful. The idea that a craft such as photography would result in producing this kind of award medal is really very interesting. It was an enormously important craft at the time, technology. And you can see this was awarded by the Northern Counties in 1883. And there's the other side, awarded to Messrs. West and Son for yachting studies. Here's another one, the Photographic Society of Ireland. So he was working internationally, wonderfully embossed. There's some clover leaves around there because I'm a clover. And they're again awarded to Messrs. West and Son for instantaneous yachting views. They didn't quite know what to call photographs in those days, but that came later. And this is in fact a photograph of all the medals that my cousin in Australia holds as a result of the G. West and Sons photographic activities. These are all awarded for photographic competitions. Now in 1884, it's not salt water, by the way. It's just water. The Mohawk, 1884. This This was a very famous picture which won awards. And in fact, I know it very well because a copy of it, a print of it, hung in my grandmother's house and took up an entire wall. He got very close to the Mohawk with his yacht and his camera and the gimbals when he took this picture. And his sailing master got really quite upset. As you'll see in a minute, it's an extraordinary study, and you'll see as well, that's actually the picture that was in my grandmother's hall, and it's in my cousin Sally's house now, and you can see it really is an extremely big print. He put this into a competition, and that was one of the judges' comments. And this now is a better picture of the Mohawk. Now, there's a lot of interesting things to notice in this picture. The first thing I'm going to say is something you actually can't see, and I think this shows some of West's skill. I believe this picture to be taken in Southampton Water, and I believe Hurst Point, yes, Hurst Point, Hurst Castle is about here on the edge of the spit. And he's actually cropped it out. And the reason why you can't see it is that if it had been there, it would completely distract the eye from the picture. So he was a very fine framer of pictures. Now you can see that if you're in a sailing boat taking this photograph, you're in a fairly hazardous position. This is making a colossal speed and a colossal amount of bone in its teeth. And up here in the rigging, you can see that there's the foretop man who's just crouched on the cross trees, and he's lost the spinnaker outhaul, which has come down to here. So he's gone to fetch the spinnaker outhaul so that they can be reeved. And this spinnaker outhaul flapped around. You can imagine what happened next. It was flapping around, and as it passed my great-grandfather's head, he briefly grabbed hold of it. I mean, mad or anything, but that's what he did. But it's a superbly rendered picture taken on this instantaneous camera, and it's an enormous award winner. A copy of this hangs in the New York Yacht Club over the stairs. And in fact, when he visited the New York Yacht Club, he said, "Oh, I see you've got one of my pictures there." And the chap said, "Oh, no, that was taken by the famous photographer West." And he said, "I am he." He liked stories like that. This is a article that he wrote saying that he thought it would be, he was told it was impossible to photograph an object while the camera was unsteady, but it's proved possible. This was the kind, he put a lot of these kind of things into the press. He was a great self-publicist, and I think he wrote lots of this stuff himself. He compared himself to a harmless pirate lying in wait for a vessel and choosing the best position, and the vessel can only be taken in a certain position. There's an enjoyable excitement when I find myself in a cluster of yachts. All our studies of yachts in full sail are photographed from a small sailing boat. Extraordinary. We keep on finding photographs which were taken and sold and put into people's houses and perhaps the cabins of their yachts. And as they turn up, it's interesting just to look and see how they work. Now, this particular picture is of 3 yachts, the Navajo, Kaluna and Satanita. I think they were all America's Cup challengers. And although you can't see it very well, over my left shoulder, you can actually see that particular yacht in my picture. And interestingly, these 2 yachts have been cropped out, so it's been turned into a full-size yacht picture. Now, we then move into his next phase. He was hired by the Admiralty, or Western Sun South Sea were hired by the Admiralty to go and take technical pictures of torpedoes and guns and mines over on your side, possibly Priddy's Hard or Clarence Yard, I don't know where these were. And this is a technical photograph on a slide, which is currently in the Hove Museum, actually, where a lot of his stuff is. And there's a diagram showing how you would lay out ground mines and you would set them off. This is number 185 in the set, so we can imagine that there's probably a very large quantity of photographs taken for the Admiralty. And they didn't just include bombs and mines. He did a lot of work on photographing torpedoes. And this is a torpedo being fired from a training ship, a drill torpedo. And people have asked me, well, what's this? And this is in fact what's called the lower boom. This is on a wooden walled ship. And these are step ladders, and these are ropes. And when you bring a boat alongside, a pulling boat alongside, you would pull the boat to one of these ropes, you would tie it up onto the boom, and then the people in the crew would go up the ladder and they would work along the boom to get on board. So that's what that is, it's the lower boom. But it was fitted to fire torpedoes, and there's an early torpedo being fired. And in fact, this is a sequence. So there's the next picture of the torpedo going into the sea, and then it goes into the sea and off it goes under the water. So that's a sequence of pictures which I found in the West Archive, which were done for the Admiralty. Now this is an interesting one. Those of you who lived in Gosport for a long time will remember the harbour launch diesel boats that used to ply between King's Stairs and across the harbour and to Dolphin and so forth. And you may notice, if you remember those boats, this is the same design. This is actually the design of the harbour launch that persisted right up into the 1970s and 80s. And I think there are a few being restored. But the interesting thing is, what on earth is this? Now, this is a form of torpedo called a spar torpedo. And the way this works is you navigate your boat close up to the ship that you want to attack, I mean close up, and you prod this against the side of the ship and you fire it, and that is intended to damage the ship. It's probably the most hazardous way of attacking an enemy ship that I think you can possibly imagine. And here, hopefully, is a film, and you can see it says Western Sun, so this was before the Our Navy. You can see the Portsdown Hill chalk quarry here. You can see the harbour launch here with its spar torpedo now put under the water. And if I press this button here, so I hope you all saw that sequence. There was also intended to be some sound of a cranky projector running it. I don't know if that came over, but I put that in there. And this is taken in what I think is called Bombketch Lake, which is part of the northern part of Portsmouth Harbour. And this is where they did a lot of these trials for this equipment. I don't know what that building is there, but some may recognise the silhouette. Much has changed, of course, since then. Now, in 1898, Western Sun were hired to film a cruise which involved the royal family. HMS Crescent was commanded for 10 weeks by the Duke of York. He was made honorary captain, and they sailed about the place with the family, and West and his chief petty officer McGregor went aboard and took a lot of photographs and film. And these were shown to the crew and the Duke of York in the dockyard in an open air performance. And they were so impressed, they said, "Mummy, you must see this." So on the 27th of August, they went to Osborne House, and after dinner, they showed the animated photographs and the photographs they'd taken on board. This is actually from the Duke of York's personal diary, which I got from Windsor Castle. So I have to say that the Queen agreed that I could put those words on there. She was very impressed. The pictures were shown in Osborne House in one of the doorways. I don't quite know which one. They alternated the lantern slides with the film because they didn't really know how to join film together very much in those days. So the Queen said that she hadn't been very impressed with films in the past, but this is very pleased. She's very pleased indeed. That's a review from a magazine called The Optician in September 1898. And that is HMS Crescent, and you see it's now lost its sails and all the rest of it. This, I think, is Fort Blockhouse on the Gosport side, your side, and it's making its way into Portsmouth Harbour. And that's the ship that was commanded in which they went aboard. So as a result of showing film to the Queen, a programme was made. This is the exhibition. This is the lantern slides, and you can see animated photographs by Western Sun, lantern slides, limelight, so forth. And this is, I won't read it in detail, but this is the programme that was actually made on that day. So you got a slide, then you get an animated film, then you get some slides, animated film, slides, boats racing around the fleet. Now, the fact that these films have been shown to Queen Victoria, of course, made a big difference to West's standing. And from 1897, it was possible to make moving films on a commercial basis. And in 1898, this is the business he went into. I think he'd become quite wealthy as a result of the photographs, and so he had quite a lot of capital that he could put into the business. He got privileged access to all kinds of naval exercises, and that was largely through having made these high-level royal and military contacts. So this is what happened in 1898, the Royal Command, the Cruise of the Crescent. And that's a photograph taken by CPO McGregor on HMS Crescent of the royal family. It's not charming. And there's a lot of care has gone into making these cheeses here, as you see. That photograph's actually in the royal collection as well, so you can see it online. And there's the Crescent. This is an article in the newspaper talking about what happened. Her Majesty sat in the drawing room and so forth. The Queen had previously seen animated pictures. So that was the press report of that event. Now in 1897, there was the Jubilee, Silver Jubilee festivities, and West was on board to take photographs of what was going on. And the Turbinia was the first turbine-powered yacht built by Charles Parsons of the time. And he writes in his autobiography that the Turbinia appeared steaming through the fleet at 35 miles an hour, and a great sensation was caused. So he went and found the Turbinia and said he'd like to take some photographs of the craft going at full speed. And Mr. Parsons said, "Oh, it's too difficult." But in fact, he did do so. And as you'll see, at 12 o'clock, there was the Turbinia, and he managed to take some photographs. And Parsons was so pleased that he actually invited him to the Tyne to take the definitive photographs of that steam-powered launch. So we move on. There's only two frames left. There's only two frames left of the Turbinia, and I got this from actually an article in a film magazine, and I've just animated them together. This is the only part. This is the only moving film we have of the Turbinia. It's just two frames, but even so, it gives you an impression, I think, of the speed. And he used this Turbinia film in a lot of his programs as part of the promotion. In fact, you can see one of his advertisements here, flyers, and you can see how proud he was of the Turbinia there. Under royal and distinguished patronage, as shown before Her Majesty the Queen. So this is exactly the kind of advertisement that was going out in the brochure 1899. So in 1898, he packed all this stuff up and went to London, St. James's Hall, and in November 7th to 11th, he was able to actually show the Cruise of the Crescent film, and important people were there. The admirals, many admirals were there. Members of the Navy League. The Navy League eventually transmuted into another organisation, which we might talk about later. But of course, the great thing was it was silent film. So how could you actually put a 2-hour show on and make it interesting? The seats were cost between 5 shillings to a shilling. And to put that in context, 5 shillings in 1897 was worth about £43. There is the St. James's Hall, Piccadilly. Doesn't exist anymore. That was where he showed his first films. And he decorated the stage with Union Jack, White Ensign. There was an orchestra, lady singer. The hall was full of people. And he was the compere, introduced sound effects. So in order to make the sound interesting, he put people behind the screen, rubbing sheets of sandpaper together and the like. And although this isn't actually of that exact event, there was quite a long tradition actually of having sounds happening behind the screen. And this is an example from the Polytechnic of an earlier presentation. You can see they're banging gongs, they've got thunder sheets, they're rolling cannonballs around for rumbles. And that was basically how he made the sound of the film. And there's the projector over here. So here's an advertisement for that first presentation. And again, here he describes in considerable detail all the different sequences that went on, and in particularly the Turbinia, very proud of. Film showing was quite dangerous because the film itself was highly inflammable and could explode. And there'd been a very serious film fire in Paris, which had killed many people. And so the London County Council set up very strict regulations to say you had to have a booth to project from. It was codified again in 1909. So his very first showing was actually interrupted because they said, well, it's not safe. You have to set up a safety measure for showing these films. And so he actually did sort it out. It took a little while with some corrugated iron. And to show you the kind of thing he had to do, that's a later example. But that's the kind of thing you had to put into any kind of hall before you could actually show a nitrate film. And that's just a photograph I took of a can of nitrate film having caught fire. And even if you were to drop that can of film into a bucket of water, it would go on burning. It would just burn until it was all consumed. Well, in 1901, a cruise ship, the Ophir, was turned into a naval ship for a brief period, and it cruised the world with the new royal family. And so MacGregor, doughty old MacGregor, was sent off around the world in this ship. As you can see, it's got a white ensign. One of the crew drew lots of pictures and wrote a book about it. But that is HMS Ophir, cruise liner Ophir, Oriental Pacific Line, I think. And he, having taken all those pictures, and MacGregor brought them back, he was invited to show them at Sandringham, and the family had these telegrams, which were written, this from Sir Charles Cust, to say, come to Wolverton and set up your projecting equipment. And Alfred wrote back and said, yes, replying, we'll be there, give ample time to fit up. And then after the film show had been completed, he'd arranged with his family that if it had been a success, he would simply send a short telegram with the word snap on it. And snap was Alfred's way of saying, yes, it all went very well. When you were making the moving films, you had to develop it and you had to dry it. And he developed it in a pan, and then he hung the film on a drum and put gas jets inside to make it dry. Now, again, if you think about the implications of having explosive nitrate film and gas jets, it's quite worrying. Whilst that's not his, that's an exact example of the kind of way that the film was dried, and this inside was heated by a stream of hot air from gas. And that's how the film was dried, and then it was spooled up. He had quite a lot of people working for him, one of whom was James Adams, and there was a great competition amongst people who did films to have a patent, which other people would have to pay for. So many of the exhibitors designed and built their own patent systems to get around them. And this is one of the ones that was done for Alfred West's company by James Adams of Southsea. There was an enormous number of different names and types of projectors and cameras. And this is just a short list taken from a book I was reading of all the things that film projectors were called. The photo vivant, the velograph, the kineopticon, the matograph, the zoetrope, the fecalistiscope. And again, because these names were trademarked, people kept on having to invent new names for the kind of projectors. And these are some pictures of the kind of projectors that were in use at the time. You'll see that some of them have wide films, some of them have narrow films. Some of them are lit by lanterns, some of them are lit by electricity, some of them have, some of these are domestic projectors as well. This one's quite interesting because this one, the film is strung together in a loop, and the only way you can actually see the film is by putting your eye into a hole to view it. So in fact, it's an early precursor. And another one. This is the shutter, which interrupts the film. So many different ways of doing projectors. He wasn't the only he wasn't the only filmmaker, of course. R.W. Paul started quite early. Cecil Hepworth, you come across his films quite often, and I think Hepworth actually worked to some extent with West. We think that they probably shared films and shared technologies. Burt Akers, very famous American filmmaker, and Charles Urban, the Warwick Trading Company. And there was a lot of interchange between these different companies. Although it was competitive, they shared and helped each other as they could. In fact, some of the films credited to the Warwick Trading Company and Hepworth are quite clearly by West. So in Portsmouth, he showed them in Portland Hall in London. and the Polytechnic in Regent Street, which became his London home. There's an advertisement for one of his early shows in Portsmouth under Royal and Distinguished Patronage. He wasn't shy to make this point wherever he went. The Polytechnic was where he regarded as his London home, and you can see that the film is now called Our Navy, although it's still G. West and Son, and he details the career of the Blue Jacket. So one of the early sequences was showing how a boy grew up and became a sailor and all the training that was associated with it. This was roughly the time of the Boer War, so there's a great interest in film to do with the military, and that was a major staple of many of the films. It is an entertainment every father should take his son to see, every mother and daughter delight in. In Gosport in January 1903, Our Navy was shown at the Thorngate Hall. I'm sure it probably still exists. And he used to invite people from military establishments to come and see things for free, and school children and so forth. And from Worthing, it's reported that 5 boys applied to join the Navy during the week. And there's another one, Thorngate Hall. Mr. West can be assured of an enthusiastic welcome. The Victoria Hall in Portsmouth was one of his early shows. And in fact, I remember going to that cinema with my father before it was closed down. It's where the Polytechnic building is now, if you know Portsmouth. That was the Nuffield Club. The building that's there now is leaning over slightly, I think. This is the inside of the Polytechnic Theatre. Sorry, that's the inside of the Victoria Hall. I do apologise. Early in the 20th century, he set a team together to go to Australia and New Zealand, and he hired a music hall entertainer, Mr. Snezell, and Captain Edwards, the naval man, and they travelled to Australia with the films, and they had quite a lot of success across Australia and New Zealand. That's the ship they would have gone in. And that's G.H. Snezell, a very strange man, an odd choice, and indeed, on record, it shows that eventually they fell out, and West did sue him for some money that he owed him. These are some of the newspaper articles I won't dwell on now, which were printed in Australia and New Zealand about there were Hobart, for example, about how the show was carried forward there. That's quite a nice advertisement from the Theatre Royal Hobart, and again showing the promotional style really of Our Navy. Now, none of the films that he made of this type survive, I'm sorry to say, but we do have a catalogue, and we can see some of the theme. Here is the boy saying goodbye to his mother fondly on the station, and here he is returning home and having supper. And interestingly, these would have been not indoors at all. They'd have been outdoors to get the light, so there were sets built outdoors. Here he is probably on a naval ship, probably being measured for his uniform, I think. Here are some of his colleagues in what he called the cradle of the Navy. It's well known that every person who goes to join the Navy has to go to HMS Victory and be measured for the uniform on the quarterdeck of HMS Victory, which is where that was taken. And returning home as a fully fledged sailor, he meets his sweetheart. In Canada, 1902, Halifax, Nova Scotia, and he went with them, and he made an enormous flag, 36 by 35 feet, on which the words Our Navy was written, and he asked the ship's captain if it could be flown, he could fly his flag, and he said, oh yes, of course you can fly a flag. It was just so enormously big that it was ridiculous, but he actually managed to get the flag up, and it was flying on the ship when it arrived in Canada. The captain had a bit of a shock, he's written here. It was probably a bit like that. Whilst in Halifax, he discovered that the electricity supply for the projector wasn't sufficient, and there's a tram system in Halifax, and so he sent his CPO out to attach some wires to the tram lines, and he used that power to drive the projector wouldn't be allowed today. I'm not supposed to be allowed then, actually. The operator was an ex-CPO from HMS Vernon, was equal to the occasion. A cable was run along the tram lines, but it was too powerful. So what happened was he put the ends of the cables into some barrels, and that acted as a resistance. And when the barrel of water started to boil, he took the wires out and put it into another one. Quite bizarre, extraordinary. This film was made in Portsmouth Harbour. And it purports to show the Russo-Japanese War, but in fact, he filmed it, and it was basically sold to another company to drop into some footage of the Russo-Japanese War. Now, as he took that photograph, or that film, I should say, you saw that the ship tracked across, and here is the ship. And if you see flying at the ensign staff here is a rising sun. In fact, it's blank in this case, it's just white. In the middle frame, it's a rising sun has been painted on. And just on frame 52, he forgot to paint that frame, and you can actually see the white ensign on the stern of the ship. So that's an interesting insight into how films were manipulated. Fake news is nothing new. It was a time for patriotism. It was a time for Rudyard Kipling. It was the Boer War. It was the Siege of Ladysmith. Harold Begbie was a friend of his, and he wrote poems of the kind of Kipling style. I won't read them out now, but they're very patriotic, and they talk about the Boer War and how the guns were hauled to the Siege of Ladysmith. And this is a review in the Morning Post. Mr. Alfred West has accomplished, I think, actually Terry put this on the advertisement, didn't she? And there were many patriotic songs. There's Mr. Begbie's book. And these would have actually been read out as part of the performance, and there were also patriotic songs being sung, as well as the son of this sea-girt England. It could almost be Kipling. This is the Navy's cradle, and in fact he quoted this poem in one of his publicity leaflets. Now, how do we know it's by Alfred West? Well, every time you made a film, you could send it off for copyright, and the copyright was done by printing a strip of film and putting it on a copyright assertion document, and then that would act as your proof that it was your film in Stationers' Hall. They are in the National Archive. They were discovered, in fact, about 15 years ago. They were still there, nitrate film actually pinned to these paper forms in the National Archive. So they were quickly hoiked out and sent to the National Film Archive. But this is an example of the kind of document that you would do to prove that you had taken this particular film. And there it is. And there's Alfred West's signature. And there indeed is the exact sequence that's on this film, because I was able to get these strips and scan them and then animate them using a computer. So that in fact is the exact film that's being shown there, and that's one of his sequences. And that's another one showing Jack. Obviously always do your courting on a Union Jack. So as a result, you can take these strips of film and you can turn them into animations, and that's what I've done here. In fact, if you look at this one will come up a bit later as well. So these are all taken from the National Archives, and they're just sequences to prove that it's your film. This one, he was very proud of this. He went to Portsmouth skating rink, paid for some sailors to have some skates, and then just filmed them. And there they are. So he's at the Polytechnic in Regent Street. By 1898, he had 50 staff on his books. The Royal Command was clearly a big vote winner in terms of getting publicity, and he became national. This is the Polytechnic in London, and you can see it's actually showing an advertisement for his films. It's just by Oxford Circus. The BBC is just up here to the right. Lots of advertisements were placed all over the place. Theatres, music halls were used as venues. And this is an interesting plate that was given to me last autumn, which is in fact sort of a photograph, and it's also drawn on. And this would have been used in a music hall and placed into a projector as an advertisement for next week's show. So that's actually what it is. I've actually reversed it so you can read it there. But that would have been put on the screen. The King's Theatre in Portsmouth used to do something very similar in between the interval. And interestingly, not one to waste a picture, that's actually a printed version of the same thing from, in this case, Sunderland. So you can see that he's a national organisation. I've been going through the National Newspaper Archive recently, and there's an enormous amount of stuff in there. I've got 400 indexed items so far. The text is very florid. He always tries to mention the Polytechnic Regent Street, but later ones reveal that he became a bit of a filler. So in the early days, he was doing this kind of thing in the Daily Telegraph, a big advertisement, classified advertisement, the seats for shillings, book early. But towards the end of the period, 1915, he'd really become Our Navy alongside a comedy and a tragedy of the rails. So he'd become a bit of a filler. And by 1915, really, he wasn't a force to be reckoned with at all. So his period really goes from 1897 to about 1911, 12. He even went to Bosco's Empire Pictures in Dudley, and it's almost impossible to see, but it's there. It says West's famous pictures of Our Navy alongside The Lost House and Girl of the Golden West. And of course, instead of charging 4 shillings for admission, he would charge 6pence. How the mighty were fallen. A Born Showman. This was intended to look a little bit like a powder. If you had a headache, you would have a powder in a blue envelope, and you would open it up, put it into some water, and you would then drink it and you feel better. But he actually had these little paper things made up with some writing on them, and then when you open them up, there was an advertisement inside. And he left these on buses, in restaurants, and all over the place, hundreds of them. And this drove a lot of traffic to his show. This was one in Bournemouth, in fact. And he won a prize of 2 guineas for doing that, which would probably be in the order of, oh, I don't know, probably £200 these days. Here's this is a cardboard medal, which you could take away with you after you'd seen the show. And these are cigarette cards that were made, in this case, Ogden cigarettes, again, all using his photographs, still photographs from his shows. This is a postcard which you might buy after the show you'd seen it. Here's another postcard. I think these are from George Malcolmson. What kind of camera did he have? Well, the moving cameras, we don't have any of them, but they would have looked very much like this with a big hand crank on the side. That's in Hove Museum. And this is a picture of Alfred West with his hand-cranked camera at some kind of military tattoo, taken by a colleague, no doubt. So that's that's one of the few pictures we actually have of him actually at work. Hello, Alfred. This is the other picture we have of him at work. This is the Coronation Review in the early 1900s. And here he is with his hat on backwards, his obviously cranking his handle. This is the review going on in the background. In 1905, he was invited to show film at the Royal Albert Hall, and he was honoured for the work he did. He actually made a film show which was shown at the time, and he was given this as a gift. And Exhibit A, if you have my picture on the screen as well, this is in fact Alfred West's presentation bust. There we are, and you can see the inscription at the bottom. Great family treasure, that. This is the advertisement for that particular event. And somewhere I think we can see a special cinematograph exhibition of Our Navy. It had to be called a commemoration rather than a celebration because we were friends with the French at that point. This is the Times correspondence article about it, and it turns out that he had to sit in the on the staircase. He wasn't allowed to go and sit where he should have done still. A bit more descriptive material about that event. Full of Nelsonia. In 1905, he made a film sequence, which was actually shown where a 92-year-old who'd actually served under a captain who'd been one of Nelson's captains was filmed. There is I think the Victory as it was then. That's the floating bridge, which you may remember. And this was a film that he made. You may not be able to hear me over the projector, but this young lad was called Frank Begg, and in 2005, his family reenacted this scene. You'll see more of that later on. In 1912-13, he was selling up, and he wrote a catalogue, which is this. There's a copy in the British Library, and that contains, as he felt, the detail of every single film he'd taken. I don't think it's complete by any means, but it has been published, and you can look at it online if you want to. That's the front page of it. Here are his famous medals. Here's Alfred. Here's the flag that he liked so much when he went to Halifax. He expanded our navy, of course, into the army and the colonies, and also yachting, none of which really we have, which is a great shame. Over 2 million people have visited the Polytechnic to witness these pictures. These are some pictures from the catalogue. You can see down this side, it tells you how long the sequence is. And on this side, I think it tells you the reference number that you'd have to ask for it. And there are some more pictures from the catalogue. This was a sequence to do with the boy turning into a sailor. There's mention here of Attack on Wayline, and that film actually does exist. I have found it recently. All these are pictures from the catalogue, and you can download it and read it in your own time. Now, he must have made an enormous amount of money. Here's the inside of the Polytechnic at the time. Here are the flags decorating the stage. The screen would have been placed here. This racked seating is probably the 1 shilling seating. I think there's probably some more comfortable seating somewhere else. The seats at the Polytechnic were between 5 shillings and 1 shilling. And for reference, £1 is, according to the Bank of England today, is worth £123 now. So that a 5 shilling seat was £30, but you can go down to £6.15 if you just walk in. 100 seats, 9 performances a week. I'm just guessing the figures here pretty much, but it looks as if he would have taken about £325,000 a year in current money, at least from the Polytechnic business. And because he had about 8 teams around the country, you can multiply that out. So between 1897 and 1913, I have a conservative estimate that at 2018 prices, he probably brought in about £4.8 million, which really does give you a context for this. It's such a shame we've lost the pictures. There's an interesting article written by Commander Ronald Strudd in 1950, who describes how he'd seen the films, and there were sailors, old say dogs, naval cadets, and he loved it. It shaped my life. And he explains that in the world of ironclads and jack tars continued to hold sway over my imagination. I'm going to be a sailor. And that was one of the results, really, of all this work. That's one of the stills. You see another one. There was a second West, as it happened, T.J. West, and he tried to pretend that he was Alfred West. Alfred West took out very many advertisements to say he was the only Alfred West. I found some of them. It's quite amusing. But even today, people get them muddled up. And there's T.J. West, not Alfred West, except no substitute. In 1916, he sold all the films to the BB Film Hiring Service of 81 Dunlop Street, Glasgow, They became the sole distributor. He gave the business up. He never got paid for it, and the company went bankrupt. They passed on to Argosy Films, which also went bankrupt. And that's an article from the Bioscope by BB Pictures, proudly saying that they now own all the West pictures. Advertising went everywhere. This is the marketplace in Reading. And over down in the corner here, this postcard, a commercial postcard, you see the advertisement there. People are getting very interested in the academic side of all this. And there are various names: George Malcolmson of Gosport, Rosalind Leveridge, Russell Baldwin. The Hove Museum has the Barnes collection. And the plates, the original photographic plates, are now in Midhurst. If you go to the Internet Movie Database, you'll find a lot of entries for West films, none of which link to any films, but this is a very convincing list. I didn't put it there. Somebody's actually put it in, and I don't know who. So in 1913, 56,000 feet of film catalogue, all sold. He kept the negatives. And from 1920, he lived in Totland Bay in this house. He grew apples. He moved to Southsea in 1928 and moved to Southsea Terrace, overlooking the sea, the same place where Peter Sellers was born, and finally went to 18 Wimbledon Park Road. In 1931, he travelled around the world and wrote articles for the newspaper and died in 1937. And that's his contemporary obituary. He's still wearing the knitted tie, you notice, and still the same collar. Sorry, that's not his obituary. That's the book. And here's the obituary. He was 80 years old. And Dolores Kerrigan Clover and family went to Kingston Cemetery, worked out where the grave was, and pieced it back together. So Alfred is now remembered properly. Now I'm going to show you a film. The music's made by my cousin, Charles Malevra. He's a film composer, and he took the film that we've got and set it to music. Hopefully you'll hear the music, and you can watch what we've got left of Alfred West films.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you now. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, I can hear you now.
Yeah.
When I went to switch the sound for the film, I realised that I actually had the effect because of switching myself off, and it's because I don't completely understand Zoom. I do apologise.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it was wonderful anyway.
Yes, it was superb, David. Thank you so much. Is there, and so many people I'd like to show that to. Is it, you haven't recorded it, have you, by any chance?
I think Terry is going to make this available on the website.
Oh, good, good. What website will it be on?
Is Terry there?
Yes, I am here. Yes, Zoom makes an automatic recording. We might just need to do a quick edit on the beginning of it, but we'll put it onto the Gosport Heritage Open Days website, where David's talk has been promoted on that page. Okay. So
well, if David can send us a link or a memorandum of that, that'll be great.
Yes, please, definitely.
Well, now I'm back. I'm just. Has anybody got any questions about the film and photography side of it?
Oh,
just totally overwhelmed. Absolutely overwhelmed. I'd certainly like to pass it to my daughter, who's a sailor, daughter Liz. You know her, David.
Yes, that's right.
And I'd like to pass it to my son as well, who's interested in early cinema. So if you could, I have to go, unfortunately. Thank you. It was brilliant.
Nice
and if there's a way of being able to watch that again, I'd be so grateful to know. Thank you. Got to leave you now. Sorry.
Has anybody got any comments to make? I'm happy to have anything.
Just want to say thank you very much, David. I enjoyed that very much indeed.
Good. That's Dolores.
Yes, it is Dolores. Sorry.
I put your photograph in there if you saw.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I saw it. It was lovely to see it again, actually. It seems so long ago since Ian and I went round there and sort of cleaned it up and found it. It took us ages, but we did it in the end. It was wonderful.
Well, I did give this talk quite some time ago and Dolores came, but I think I've changed quite a lot of it since then. So.
Yes, indeed. Yes, you have. Yes, it was absolute. There's more in it now. So much. It's really good. It's lovely. It was great. Thank you.
There's as much again, to be honest, but I'm not going to.
Part two. After an intermission, we can have part two.
There is a website actually, which if you're at all interested, in fact, I might just put it up for you so you can just see. Hold on for a second. I'll just find it from here. Here we are. It's called Our Navy, obviously, as you would expect. There it is. Hold on for 2 seconds. I won't mess the sound up this time. There's the website. You can see the little skaters there, look. And on this website, and there's the, if you want to look at it again, there's a section here called Films Extant. And this talks about how some of the stuff was discovered. And in particular down here, you can see that one, for example, which I showed you earlier, the picture of the people. And if I go down to here, you'll see that the British Film Institute has got some films which I'm convinced by Alfred West.
Oh, yes.
It couldn't be by anybody else.
Yeah.
This was the kind of thing that would have been shown to your cinema audience in those early days.
Wow.
Because these are actually boy sailors, as you can see.
Yeah.
David, I think I caught a short clip of somewhere of video of Queen Victoria's body being brought over.
Yes, that's in there. That's in there. Yes, that's in there too. Hang on, give me a second. I can pull that one up. It's always interesting. Here it is. There it is. This is on the British Film Institute site. It's not a bad site, but they put all sorts of stupid comments in. This was Alfred West's film of the funeral cortege. You can see that the Victoria and Albert, the Royal Yacht, is just coming in the back here. This is Isle of Wight. There's one of those harbour launches. Look. So that is Queen Victoria's procession, and there are the guns, the gun salute. And this would have been shown over and over again in London, the Polytechnic, all around the country actually, because there was no news. There it comes. Look, there it comes. This is the Alberta, which is the second Royal Yacht. There were 2 Royal Yachts, half-mast flag. Interestingly, the ensigns, the standards are carried at full mast, and I think that's probably because the monarch never dies. I don't really know why they're not at half-mast. There must be that reason, I think. And there's Victoria and Albert, and the escort.
Marvellous.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it's wonderful.
And Alfred cranking his camera, you know. That's the Alberta. Paddle steamer. I was only slightly concerned there wasn't enough Gosport there for you.
It was actually, I think it was fascinating the way Gosport, not just Gosport, but, you know, Gosport and Portsmouth Southsea was so woven into his story, David. I think
Good.
you really sort of localised it for us and showed how he developed out to,
Yes.
you know, a much wider
Yes.
remit as well.
These are sailors scrubbing hammocks, by the way. Obviously posed for the camera.
Still trying to get a smile in.
And people just loved this, you know, they thought it was real. I mean, it went down a bomb. But by about 1914, 15, it had become old hat. And as I say, it ended up in small theatres at sixpence a go, and all that disappeared, really. There we are. That's probably enough of that.
Well, thank you so much. That's been absolutely fascinating. Really has been a lovely talk, and it's been a pleasure to have you with us tonight, David, and to actually learn so much about your great grandfather, and you know, someone who sprang from the West family of Gosport, and we hope to keep the name alive now.
I think it deserves a plaque somewhere. I don't know quite where, but
well, thank
good.
you
Well,
very
thank you all very much. And I've enjoyed myself, and it's a weird thing to do it like this, but it has sort of worked. So.
Worked very well, I thought.
Thank you very much, David.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.